welcome everyone. I'm with Kami Kinkaid. She's a K-12 practice leader and associate principal at Perkins and Will, based out of the San Francisco office, right, Kami?
Yeah, yes.
So thanks for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So Kami, on the weekly show, we've talked to several K through 12 design experts about what school districts need to do to safely reopen schools this fall, which we're here. This is a few months ago. I'd love to get your thoughts on what you guys are doing as designers and architects and how you're working with your clients to kind of get these schools reopen in a safe and healthy fashion. Can you talk about some of these short-term items?
Yes. So I think, as school opens, and here in California, most schools are still not open in person, but there are some that are starting to open. So there's sort of the short-term process of getting the schools back open with students, making sure they're safe, as well as the long-term. From a short-term standpoint, really the schools are trying to react and create an environment that's safe quickly. And there's some sort of really simple tools that they're using. Really low-touch surfaces is a big piece. Can we minimize when the students are coming in that they're not touching everything and really transferring those germs around? So it's something as simple as having doors on hold opens into the restrooms and things like that. Those are some areas where we're seeing as well, lots of hand washing stations, hand sanitizer areas as well. So those are just some simple infrastructure pieces that can happen. I think beyond there, there would be renovation happening if there was the time, but obviously there isn't the time and probably the money at this point. So having, as the people enter the schools, having an area where there's a screening point where temperatures can be taken, those sort of things. And a lot of times there may be already existing vestibules that can be used to kind of have that stop point. But if not, maybe it's as simple as a table that's set up where people can be greeted. They can ask, who have you been in touch with? Do some temperature taking, and then they're allowed to continue on to campus.
Vestibules became a big deal after Sandy Hook and Columbine, and now they would serve a dual purpose, right? Sort of a stopping point for kids coming in and temperature checks and all that. It seems like a logical choice, but not all school districts are there, whether budget-wise or maybe they're midway through updating their schools with the security vestibules.
Yeah, and I think that we've found, depending on where the school is situated, if they're in an urban environment versus suburban, a lot of who they are as a school, their pedagogy, what they believe, and how they really invite people, families in. That entrance is important. So they also want to make sure it's warm and inviting, but also safe. So the design challenge we have is how do you actually create both those scenarios at that front door, which is fun, actually. So
it is, yeah, and also the kid, we're all overwhelmed during this pandemic, and we need to, make the kids feel comfortable when going back to school. I mean, just like we want to feel comfortable going back to our offices. What are some of the things that school districts can do around setting up classrooms and corridors and other learning spaces to make them feel safe and comfortable?
Yeah, I think, I have a fourth grader and she's getting ready to go back to school, and she asked she was a little fearful a little bit. And I think creating sort of safe spaces for students to kind of pause, maybe sit down, take a moment. Maybe there's a lot of people that they're not used to seeing for a while. Those sort of environments are, I think, really key. We talk about it related to sort of social emotional learning. And really this is the emotional part where we can create those environments to make them feel safe and excited about being back at school and seeing their friends. So we do that with either sort of niches. At one school, we called them an in-between space. So say if you're in high school and you're on a block schedule and you have all those times in between, you know, is there a place off the corridor that really is a place to pause, maybe to meet with your friends, have that moment. And now it sort of is going to serve another purpose to also maybe calm the nerves a little bit. So I think there's great opportunities to enhance really the school, the spaces that they provide. So we're learning and yeah, excited about what's to come in education despite the challenging times we have right now.
What are some of the kind of major trend lines you're seeing in K through 12 school design?
I think that's something, you know, probably in our progressive schools, the need to have those breakout spaces, right? Those small gathering where they can take 3 or 4 kids together and actually be able to teach. And I think with now, as we return to school in smaller groups, cohorts, right, the need to have that smaller group space is really essential. In some schools, we've actually implemented it. So that gives them the advantage. But in other schools, maybe it is just more of a traditional, you know, single classroom. So how can we create some of those smaller spaces? For many of the schools we've worked on, San Francisco Friends School was one where we implemented breakout spaces early on. And that was to allow for that small group learning to occur. And that creates a nice acoustic separation. Obviously, in our existing conditions, maybe that we're not able to do it exactly that way yet, but I think there's simple solutions such as movable walls, which can at least visually separate the spaces, and especially for the younger kids, right? They get so distracted. So having the ability for maybe that 4 or 5 kids to talk with the teacher is important. There's also systems that are produced by many manufacturers like Steelcase, or there's a dirt wall system, which is traditionally used in offices to create and change around sort of office configurations. Those things can be used also in educational environments to kind of create those sort of spaces and also create that acoustic separation. So I think you're going to see more of that implementation of those smaller pieces. And it's ideally, right, you would design them in, whether it was a configuration like La Scuola, where we have, you know, 2 classrooms with the breakout space in the middle, which then can be accessed onto the corridor or the circulation space. There's different configurations that can really support the pedagogy of the school and how they function the best.
Are you hearing, you know, this whole experiment of, you know, e-learning, remote learning is quite interesting. Is it going to have a long-term impact on K-12? And I'll give you one example. We're hearing of situations where teachers might want to have a video room where they could record a lesson for their kids to watch later, whether it's over the weekend, at home, for, you know, extension of the daytime lesson. Are you hearing of any of that at this point? Obviously, we're in this situation where kids are, you know, forced to e-learn, and then many of those kids are going to go back eventually, and it's going to be either all or nothing. But I feel like some of the teachers might want to stick with, you know, some of the Zooming and recording lessons. Is that just too far out there at this point?
I don't think so. And, you know, we've been talking about that sort of system probably for years, really, about putting the infrastructure in the classrooms to allow for recording, to allow for remote learning, because a lot of times there were variables that even in today's environment or in yesterday's environment, right, that desire was already there. I think now, right, it's been pushed. Some schools were a little bit more ready for the technology, and others were not so ready. So I think that is a key point, that we have to really design ahead of the game. And, you know, we have always approached things from creating a flexible environment that allows for that growth of infrastructure, allows reconfiguration of the classrooms, because flexibility is really the key as we move forward. But having a robust infrastructure of technology, testing out sort of, you know, different tactics on how kindergartens, right, how do they learn remotely? As I have a kindergartner, how do they really stay focused? It's a challenge. But, you know, high school is a whole other world. And I've often thought about, right, the high school model is really going to change. I was thinking about there's almost going to be like a hoteling situation in the classrooms, where probably maybe some students come to the class, but some are at home. So there's that sort of flexibility that you really see is developing and changing. It's definitely an exciting time in education and what's going to happen.
Hey, Kinkaid, I want to thank you once again for your time and insights into the K through 12 design sector.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.